Hello. Why are high-speed dudes running around with 40-round magazines while standard grunts either have 30 or 20? Is having more rounds in your magazine more better than less? What about belt feds or drum mags? Today, I want to talk a little bit about ammo capacity, because while everyone wants to talk about rates of fire, how big the round is, and the so important stopping power, people don't want to talk about how the amount of ammo you carry can be just as, if not more important than the actual gun itself you're firing it out of. Let us begin. Over the past couple of years, we've seen more and more pictures of high-speed door kicker types sporting 40-round magazines for their rifles, which, if you don't know, is a break from the traditional 30-round magazine. On the flip side, the Army's new assault rifle, the M7, comes standard with a 20-round magazine. So why the change? Well, for decades now, the standard rifle magazine size for the standard small arm of your military has been 30 rounds. This goes for your M16s and M4s, your AK platforms, and the majority of other rifles used by modern militaries. But how did we settle on the magical number of 30? What exactly is so special about the big 30? Well, during the initial development of the AK-47, Russia initially tested 25-round straight box magazines, but because of the tapered nature of the 7.62x39 round, it needed to be curved. That curve saved a bit of vertical space, which allowed for an additional 5 rounds to fit in a decent form factor. The M16, on the other hand, had its original configurations a couple decades later come standard with 20-round magazines. But these were deemed to not be enough, as troops had a tendency to just blast all 20 of them on full auto and empty the mag before the first piece of brass hit the ground. Transition to 30-round magazines started in 1970 and gradually replaced all the 20-round mags a few years later. In 1980, as NATO countries were really leaning into the same 5.56 round as the M16, the alliance adopted the M16's 30-rounder as the universal magazine. This was done under the Standardization Agreement, or STANAG 4179. So if you've ever wondered why these mags are sometimes referred to as STANAG mags, now you know. All this, of course, is useless information if you happen to be France, which created a bespoke magazine for their FAMAS rifle that held 25 rounds, which is funny because the FAMAS uses a 3-round burst and 25 is not divisible by 3. I always thought it was kind of the whole scheme behind the hot dog bun conspiracy, where they don't sell them in similar quantities, so you always have too much of one of them and then you have to buy more of whatever you ran out of first, and then you run into the problem of not having enough of the other thing. You can Google it, but it goes a lot deeper than you might think. But speaking of food, I want to talk to you guys about Factor 75, the best delivery meal service you can find these days to get fresh, never frozen, chef-crafted, and dietitian-approved meals delivered straight to your door. These are ready in just 2 minutes and are the perfect stress-free way to achieve your nutrition goals for 2025. If you're like me and a man that lives by himself and own exactly one pan that you got from Goodwill, Factor 75 is the best thing you can do, honestly. Because not only do I save money by not going to the store, I save money by not even having to cook it in the first place, or cleaning anything after. Factor 75 offers weekly meals with 35 different options and 60 different add-ons of your choosing. And if you lean towards the vegan or vegetarian side of the house, then they have you covered too. You can choose the plan that works for you, whether it just be 4 meals a week to cover down on those busy late nights, or a full 18 for the whole week. You can also choose gourmet options like fillets, shrimp, truffle butter, or those broccolini things your girlfriend likes. And because I love all of you, you can get 50% off and free shipping on your first Factor box using my link. Click the link in the description or scan the QR code with your phone and make sure you use my code, which you can see here on the screen. Using that code helps the channel immensely and helps you to save a lot of money. I am a busy man, so using Factor 75 lets me use more time to focus on these videos or other important things like grinding out the Cayo Perico heist, and without all the guesswork of trying to figure out what food fits my nutrition goals. Again, make sure you use the QR code, the link, and my code, and thank you again to Factor 75 for helping to support the channel. But why 30-round magazines anyway? Why not 31, 32, 40, or 50? Well, 40 and 50 round magazines exist, and the military did experiment with them, but as you stuff more rounds into a single magazine, you start to run into issues. Bigger magazines are more susceptible to having issues with the spring that physically pushes the rounds up into the rifle chamber. The longer the magazine, the easier it is to bend or warp and therefore become completely useless. You can try to solve that with something like a quad stack magazine, but those require more complex designs, and adding complexity means more chances for something to break. That's a big deal when you consider magazines receive more physical abuse compared to a lot of the other gear, because you're doing things like dropping them on the ground, low crawling, and generally speaking, even small militaries need tons of magazines, so a simpler design is also cheaper. Now, a lot of these issues have been solved with newer polymer magazines that we're used to seeing these days, but the entire logistics of the military is set up to support 30-round magazines, so the trade-off would be questionable at best. Bigger magazines make it harder to shoot from complex cover, so going prone with a stendo is generally an unpleasant experience. This is why you see rifles where the shooter is expected to fire in the prone almost exclusively, trading a 30-round magazine for a 20-round for better ground clearance. But that added size also leads to things stacking on the rifle when you're walking around or trying to maneuver. Drum magazines exist, but they're mechanically complex, take forever to reload ammunition into, are expensive, and because the rounds are seated in a loading mechanism rather than seated under spring tension, they rattle around and make a ton of noise. Drum mags and generally extended mags are harder to carry around too because they're a lot more bulky. It's easier to spread out 6 30-round magazines onto your kit than it is 3 or 4 50-round magazines. They also make your rifle significantly heavier when loaded, which makes it harder to do literally anything with it. I have yet to find a real benefit to making your rifle heavier for no reason, and don't say recoil mitigation, because if you need recoil mitigation for a 5.56 rifle, you need a gym membership and protein powder, not a heavier gun. Yes, that was body shaming. No, I'm not going to apologize. This is the exact issue that machine gunners run into, which is why typically you'll see them walking around with a 50 or 100 round belt at most, and then reload to a full 200 round drum once that initial starting belt gets used up. 30 round magazines are really that sweet spot between size, ergonomics, cost, and reliability. But I just spent the last several minutes talking about why bigger magazines aren't necessarily better. So why is it that dudes with way more experience blasting ops in the faces opt to use 40 round magazines in the first place? Or even things like 60-round drum mags? To answer that, we have to take a step back as to what the benefits of these kinds of magazines are. The first, biggest, and simplest answer is that you get more chances to make your gun go bang before it goes click and you have to reload. Generally, in the case of 40-round magazines, these will be the magazines these guys start to fight in. If you're in a react-to-contact type situation where you're expecting to be engaged or ambushed but you don't know where and when, having a few extra rounds means that you can A, be more aggressive in putting rounds down range in order to gain fire superiority, and B, because reloading should ideally always be done behind cover, and this gives you more time to find and move yourself into a more suitable fighting position. In the case of these D60 drum mags that we've seen popping up, which hold 60 rounds as the name implies, are more so used to give operators the ability to lay down cover fire, but not have to carry around something like a belt-fed machine gun. This is why guns like RPKs and N27s, at least originally, came equipped with 40-round magazines, because they were there to fill the automatic rifle role and expected to go full auto, rather than your standard rifleman who's going to be almost exclusively firing semi-automatic with more carefully placed shots. Traditionally speaking, your open bolt belt-fed machine guns are going to be heavier, more complex, and more prone to jamming than your traditional closed bolt rifle system. These kinds of downsides typically aren't worth the trade-off if your particular mission set would involve only short spurts of fighting rather than prolonged engagements. But that's something you see more from special blurry-faced men on the internet rather than your standard grunt who would have to be fighting for hours at a time in certain situations. But that's also the reason the answer isn't to just give everyone a belt fed in order to have morally questionable amounts of firepower, because it's simply not necessary. In the army, your standard squad has 2 light machine guns for a total of 6 in a platoon, with 2 heavier general purpose machine guns, usually stacked in the weapons squad. If your only priority is maximizing the number of rounds down range, you start to sacrifice your ability to carry anything else like radios, grenade launchers, AT weapons, medical supplies, stuff like that. 2 machine guns per squad is a good way to ensure that you have at least 1 full auto belt fed running at any given time, either with talking guns or one picking up the slack in case the other goes down. After an initial barrage of fire to gain fire superiority on someone, having 3 or 4 machine guns really isn't any more useful than 2. At that point, you're just wasting ammo and carrying a bunch of heavy stuff. This is the reason that 99% of the time you see dudes with rifles getting after it, they're using semi-automatic fire. Would blasting full auto at a target help keep it pinned down? It may be. Is there a better use of ammo than emptying a 30-round magazine in 2.58 seconds and hitting basically nothing? Yes, there is. Unless your goal is to have fun. In that case, do what you want. Now, it goes without saying, this Goldilocks zone of magazine size and weight really only applies to these intermediate cartridges that we've been talking about. A 30-round mag of 22 Squirrel Getters is very different than what a 30-round magazine of 50 BMG rounds would look like. The Army's new round, the 277 Fury for the M7, is significantly larger than the 5.56, which is why 20-round magazines were chosen. Even then, the 20-rounders are much larger than the M4's 30-round magazines. We haven't really seen standard issue 20-round magazines since the mid-20th century, when the whole battle rifle, if you want to call it that, was in vogue. So rifles like the M14, the FAL, and the G3, which all fire the 7.62x51 round, all had 20-round magazines as standard because that's about as much as you could fit and keep it ergonomic. While as a loose concept, I think the M7 is pretty nifty, but this is my biggest concern with it. A soldier can only carry so much ammunition. A standard combat load is 7 magazines for an M4, 1 in the gun and 6 on your person. Generally speaking, it's not uncommon to have more magazines stuffed in certain places, but 7 is the doctrinal number. That number of magazines for the new rifle has not changed, but because they hold 20 rounds, a standard combat load of ammunition just got cut by a third. And because the rounds and magazines are bigger, it means it's going to be harder for guys to find ways to keister more ammo where they can. The M250, which is replacing the M249, faces the same issues. With the 250 using the same round as the M7 and the 249 the same as the M4, the exact same issues arise in terms of combat loadout. Oh, but Justin, you say, the bigger round has more stopping power, so you won't need as many to take down a bad guy. Sure, yeah, that might be true, but it's missing a very important point. Ammo capacity equals time. When rounds start going both ways downrange, you have essentially just hit the start button on a timer, and that timer determines how long you can actually fight. And how long you can actually fight is directly tied to how much ammunition you have. Shooting matches aren't just both sides sitting there hoping to be a better marksman than the guy they're trying to take out. It's dynamic and requires maneuvering, and usually doesn't end until one side runs away or gets maneuvered on and taken out. The US trains to always maneuver, and in order to do that, you need suppressing fire and fire superiority. Suppressing fire, by nature, misses a lot, almost exclusively. And its purpose is to fix an enemy in place so that the maneuver element can run around to a more advantageous position and then take them out. The less ammo you carry, the less amount of time you get on the objective, and the less amount of time you get on the objective means less time for you to maneuver around and hole punch someone in the forehead. If you get into a spot where the suppressing elements run out of ammo, now you're attacking an enemy element with a fraction of your total force and you're separated. The alternative to that is just to shoot less, but then you run the risk of not having fire superiority, which means you're just kind of stuck there plinking at someone. My point being is that by giving up how much ammo a soldier can carry, you make everything else harder and more dangerous. This isn't me saying that we should give dudes one of those machine gun ammo backpacks filled with 22s so they can spray and pray from sunup to sundown, but going below the already relatively low combat load of 210 rounds for your rifle is a risky move. What about things that don't go pew, that go boom? What about tanks and artillery? An interesting trend to see is that when you look at the evolution of the tank, ammo capacity has steadily gone down. M4 Shermans carried 90 rounds of 75mm, M60s carried 63 rounds of 105s, and modern Abrams carry 40 120mm rounds. Now, this is largely due to the fact that to carry 90 rounds of 120mm, you would be tripling the storage size and pretty much the weight of the tank. But equally as important is that compared to the 1940s, the main gun of a tank today is a laser beam in terms of accuracy, and 1 or 2 shot kills are more common than a constant back and forth slugfest between both sides. Now, if your mom didn't drink with you when she was pregnant and you managed to develop pattern recognition skills, you might notice that what I'm saying is that it's okay for tanks to carry fewer, more powerful rounds, but not a typical rifleman. There are a handful of reasons for this, which would be a whole separate video, but I'm going to talk about 2 main points. The first is that you don't suppress targets with a tank's main gun. Those rounds are meant exclusively to kill something very violently in one shot. The second is that if you're in a tank and need to suppress something, you just use one of the 3 machine guns on board and the literal thousands of rounds that each of them have. These days, the limiting factor for a tank's battlefield endurance is the fuel gauge, not the ammo rack. Artillery pieces work a little differently because they do run out of ammo, which is why this thing exists, the M992. What is that, you might ask? Well, it's literally just a magazine on tracks, or more technically known as a Field Artillery Ammunition Support Vehicle, or FAASV. While a typical M109 will carry 39 rounds on board, each one is assigned one of these weird, but in a cool looking way, resupply vehicles, and each of them can carry 90. Their entire job is to resupply their respective gun via a nifty little conveyor belt system. Generally, these hang back out of harm's way, and then when they are needed, they roll up, drop the ammunition, and go back. Being the driver for those things must be like the most boring job ever. But the trend of carrying fewer but bigger rounds seems to be the style these days. Main battle tanks are regularly being designed to now fire larger rounds, which means fewer carried. IFVs are switching from 25 to 30 and 40mm rounds, and our beloved M4 is being replaced with something that cuts a combat load by 33%. Maybe it'll work out, maybe it won't. I doubt the DoD actually cares what I think, but I hope you do. And on that note, thank you for watching. Please subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.